Let's talk about this Tara Reade thing for a moment, Nomi. This is, just from we've mentioned it in the past. The story is there's a new element to the story, and this is a very difficult situation. Yeah. There was a piece in Business Insider. It was written by McHugh. I can't remember his first name, but he is Ronan Farrow's producer. So there is a tremendous amount of credibility that he and Farrow earned in this sort of like sector, as it were. And there has been waiting for, and look, the fact of the matter is, Katie Halper does her show, not terribly dissimilar from this one. There's a political perspective. She's not a reporter per se. Sometimes we all do some reporting and some journalism in that way. And when the allegations came out from that show, there were people who were skeptical, who wanted more reporting. Then some came from The Intercept, where talked about her relationship with the Me Too organization. I can't remember what it is, but also went and checked with the brother and a friend who supposedly Reade told contemporaneously that that Biden had assaulted her and digitally raped her. And it was not, again, I happen to think Ryan Grimm is very much a reporter first, and a sort of an opinion journalist and partisan second. But that's other people have a slightly different perspective. But McHugh is on this beat, right? And he went and he found a former neighbor of Reade's, Linda Lacasse, who is a Biden supporter. So and there's a record of her supporting Biden, social media record, and said that Reade told her about the alleged assault in detail in 1995 or 96, which would have been 2 to 3 years after it happened. And she says, this happened, and I know it did because I remember talking about it. There was also a former colleague of Reade who worked at another congressional office that Reade talked to in the mid-90s of being sexually harassed by her former boss in Washington, D.C. Now, this follows the sort of phone call to, the phone call to Larry King from what appears to be Tara Reade's mother, referencing something. Nothing is specific. But this piece has moved it into the realm of being very, very difficult to deny that there isn't a preponderance. It's not conclusive. It can never be conclusive. But there's a lot of evidence here. There's been a lot of vetting here. And in many respects, as much as anything that certainly broadly as a society we have accepted. And it's going to be interesting to see now if that creates pressure on the Biden campaign to respond. And I mean, I don't know what happens from here. It is April. If you're going to deal with something like this, now would be the time as opposed to October. We also don't know, are there more of these?
Right. That's ultimately.
Usually in these type of situations, there are. And and we should also say this. Look, people talk about the timing being suspect and this and that. The only thing I can say is this was floating around there, and timing is not necessarily a function of like reporters don't turn around and do the story in a moment, or sometimes they do. Two things could be going on here. One, the allegations could be true. Two, there could be forces that are pushing the timing in a way that benefits the Trump campaign. These things are not mutually exclusive situations.
With that being said, one thing that we've learned through Weinstein and so many of these stories that have come out, including Ronan Farrow's own account, is that there's also the opposite, which is you have internal pushback. I mean, what Tara Reade did, while yes, this story has come out at a very odd time after the primary ended and now we're in the general election, she also went to Time's Up, a year ago or whatever, or she first discussed it a year ago publicly, I believe, and then went to Time's Up earlier. And Time's Up is, of course, the Me Too aligned organization, the defense fund, and it's being represented by Biden's chief aide, Anita Dunn, who is, one of the partners at probably the most powerful political consulting firm at this point, SKD Knickerbocker. And so on the Democratic side, and they're fully intertwined into pushing back against the media. So how many reporters have been on this beat, have had tips about this, have had tips about others, and it's been either ignored, silenced, because of the infrastructure of the reporting world, or just, fought back against because the Democratic establishment is just so good at burying stories. I mean, I've experienced, I've tipped people off to stories, and a reporter will look at it for a few weeks while it's timely. It's almost like catch and release,
right?
But it's not. It's just they're fighting the whole time with the person being investigated, and then the story never goes anywhere. And this is the on the other side, people get so desperate because they can't get it into the general public that they go to general media, that they go to the right wing, or they go to a leftist host because they just need to get it out somewhere. And
right.
I think all these things can be true at the same time.
Meanwhile, Rebecca Traister wrote a really important piece about this, that what's going to happen. And this piece is really, I think, more about sort of, at the end of the day, the sort of general dynamic that women are caught in a bind. But Biden's already said he's going to pick a woman as his VP. This woman is going to, part of their portfolio is going to be to deflect this allegation and broadly speaking, the other allegations about Joe Biden. And it is, this is a real cluster, because I think, you can be sensitive to this issue. You can be a feminist. You can be not a feminist, and you can come to the conclusion that, like, I'm going to vote against Trump. I don't care who the Democratic nominee is. I think that is, that's not an irrational assessment. I mean, then you can look at this from the perspective of, it's April. He has not won the majority of delegates yet. What happens at the convention? I mean, on some level, it seems to me that the only, I guess, the easiest course for Democrats on some level would be for him to drop out. Now, I want to make this clear. I don't think that means that Bernie Sanders ends up being the nominee by a long shot. I mean, Bernie Sanders has not, there is no, like, second doesn't mean anything in this.
And can I just add one thing about, I'm seeing a lot of this online, even from people who I think are tremendous. You learn this basically just by working on campaigns. Suspending a campaign does not mean, okay, the campaign's still operational, it's just like sitting there waiting. Sure, Bernie is paying people because he believes in paying people longer, and he's got the money right now. And, people have been, it's COVID.
Oh, he's paying, I think, health insurance, but I don't know if he's
insurance.
Like,
Some people are assigned to, like, DNC duties or whatever. But suspend does not mean that this campaign's operational. Suspend usually means, like, I think Hillary Clinton's 2008 campaign was suspended until 2010 or whenever it was a very long period afterwards because she had debt. Usually it has to do with debt, tying things up. In my race, it was 6 months later. We had to close down our bank accounts, pay off all of our bills, et cetera. So that's what suspending a campaign means. It doesn't mean like it's this like half dance between being a candidate and not. And I don't think Bernie is really doing a great job explaining that, especially when it comes to his chaotic strategy for the convention, which is a whole other topic that when we talk about New York, I want to talk about. But ultimately, what you're saying, he's not the second choice. They're not going to let him be the second choice. Can we just have an honest to God, understand what fights we're going into? Bernie's not the nominee. We hate it. I hate it personally, but there's no infrastructure in place. There's no deal making in place. There's no leverage available left for him to even go in there and say, all right, now I'm the nominee. No matter what, if Biden were swapped out, it's going to be chaotic. And I think you're right. And Rebecca Tracer's right. They're going to try to pick a woman who can soften the blow so that
as VP, continue
the board as VP. I actually was thinking about it a little bit more. Gillibrand, it might be a risk, but Gillibrand has become this force of nature when it comes to standing for Me Too. I don't think she's always taken the right choices, and sometimes she hasn't, but she specifically hasn't called out Biden, and that's something that I noticed a while back.
I suspect that she's still feeling the heat for people perceive her what she did in calling out Al Franken prior to an ethics investigation. So there may be some temerity there. Mm-hmm. It's a real dilemma. And frankly, I don't know, I think that, I think the way for this to happen is for, Biden to say this is too risky. I don't think that's going to happen.
The other thing is, and this is saying the quiet thing out loud, I don't think the Democrats really care. I think that they think that the sexist, the people that they need in their minds, I'm not saying this is correct. Let me just make that very clear. Their minds, there's a group of sexist Rust Belt voters that voted for Trump last time, but also voted for Obama, and Biden's the way to win them back. And it doesn't matter if Biden has these allegations, unless Trump is just a maniacal force that can turn it into something shining on Biden that wasn't on himself. But I
want to be clear though, when you say don't care, that you think that there's within the world of people who commentate and opine on this, that there could be a theory that there was, there's only so much mileage to be gained at this point with saying Donald Trump is sexist.
Right.
To the extent that people believe it, they're going to believe it. To the extent that they don't, they don't. Joe Biden's going to have a tough time, bringing this up now, without a doubt. But those people who are motivated by that are already happening. And so maybe on some level, that it neutralizes those people who voted for Donald Trump because you were sticking it to women on some level, which is conceivable. There's two realms, right, in which you assess this. One is, sort of like the moral realm, and the other is the utility realm. Mm-hmm. I don't make my voting decisions. The morality of my voting decisions are not based upon as if this was a multiple choice, question. It's a binary choice, right. And so the moral equation is, what is the moral net of voting for one person versus the other? I mean, if I walk away, I'm just saying I'm abdicating my, that's just about my own self-righteousness. That's just about my own sort of moral righteousness, which, as far as I'm concerned, you might as well just say I'm a ultra orthodox religious person, and I don't deal with the profane matters of the state. I mean, that's what that is, as far as I'm concerned. To the extent that you contemplate any morality, it's really between these two choices. And then it's really more, from my perspective, is a utility one. What worries me about this is two things. One, could it depress the vote?
Right.
I don't think it's, I think, look, there's a lot of people who are saying I'm not going to vote for Joe Biden. He's because of this, who I think are being disingenuous. I think they don't want to vote for Joe Biden, and they're going to look for a reason to proclaim that they're not. But it's conceivable that it could depress the votes of some people who are I can't bring myself to voting for a person like that. I'm not sure about that. I don't know.
I think
the other part of that, let me just, is we don't know. And if people do feel this is a credible accusation, we don't know what else is out there.
Right. Exactly.
Because these things generally don't happen once.
He has been in the Senate since he was 30 years old. He has been in the Senate of the 70s and 80s and 90s. And if you remember any of the stories that came out of the Senate during that time in Washington, during that time, it was not known for being a fair place to women. There's a lot of drinking. There's a lot of bipartisan drinking. Crazy stories came out of that era. And I just don't see Joe Biden, with his on-camera personality with women, coming out of that era not having a couple more stories. I don't know for sure.
Right.
But, as you said, usually there's a few more. And I'm just surprised that it actually hasn't come up much earlier, given how feminist groups before Biden was really in the race were frustrated by him. I feel like maybe there was some sort of institutional hush-hush happening for many years. Look how long it took this one accusation to come out. I mean, and, according to her, he said, like, come on, man, I thought you liked me. And it's a very, it's hard for me to imagine that this is the way that he basically, was like asking if she likes him. Is it true? What I understand, the messages I've been getting, are these messages true? Or, if that's the way that he approached this one time, it's not inconceivable that he didn't approach it other times. And we also say, like, people who may have felt, women who may have, just like completely hypothetical, but if they experienced something like this with Biden before, and it was something that, like, they were willing to sort of, and particularly in that era, there was a lot of times where you're just like, guys will be guys. Right.
But these moments are being reevaluated. And, part of the reason why apparently this neighbor came out, even though she said she's still going to vote for Biden. She says she's still going to vote for Biden, and she's been a Biden fan. You can look back on our social media and see it. She says, I had to come out and defend Tara, because it's one thing to say, I'm going to vote for Joe Biden, even though I know he's bad here because I want to get rid of Donald Trump. It's another thing to watch her get maligned because of something he did.
Right.
Now, that's a dynamic that could end up, if there are other women out there who went through something similar to what Tara Reade went through, at one point could say, like, I want Donald Trump out, but I also can't live with myself if I see this woman being gaslit and harangued in this manner. Because, over time, we've seen this happen, with folks like Monica Lewinsky and in many respects, like, Anita Hill. It's not exactly the same scenarios, but somehow they always get to be villainized, it seems like. And it's quite possible this may spur people to come out and say, like, I had something, not exactly the same situation with Biden, similar. And to, at the very least, provide support for her. So this is a real dilemma. For, really for Joe Biden and for the people around Joe Biden and for the funders who are supporting Joe Biden, because, Joe Biden doesn't have broad based funding support. This is like some big fundraisers are sitting down and they're making the assessment that we're talking about right now. And
it's tough because, I think ultimately this just comes down to the strategic, the voting process of the voters that are going to be influencing this election. This is the hard conversation we as progressives have to understand. Like, I think a lot of people in the movement don't necessarily get. because, we're excited and we're activists. But the second the primary ends, the general election comes down to what percentage of our base are we absolutely going to get? And if we get more than that, fantastic. What percentage of women are we absolutely going to get no matter what? Because historically, even if it's like Bill Clinton, who had real allegations against him during visible, allegations against him during a general election, they still showed up. What percentage of voters, men in the Rust Belt, do we think we're going to get, and what do we need? And I think at the end of the day, this is the unsavory truth about the Democratic electorate in this binary system that we have. There will absolutely be a core group of women who'd make that decision and say, I would rather have Donald Trump out and a bad Biden if it means that the Supreme Court, Roe v. Wade. I'm not saying everyone's thinking that way, but maybe enough in their mindset strategically. And
also, if blankety blank is his running mate, she's great. And she has a good chance of being president. And, maybe when he picks blankety blank, we don't know who it is, he says, there's a good chance she's going to be filling my shoes, not necessarily coming out and saying I'm done after 4 years or 2 years or 18 months or whatever. But even if he's implying that after 8 years, she's the one,
right.
We don't know. And so this is, I think we're just going to need to start to read the tea leaves and start to see if we get this sort of cascading sort of a media narrative. And what other, sort of luminaries in the Democratic Party do. AOC was, I think, the only major sort of political figure to come out and say, we need to take these things seriously, at least in terms of vetting these accusations. We cannot dismiss them out of hand. I wonder now what we're going to hear, particularly yesterday, and Nancy Pelosi and Pramila Jayapal endorsed Joe Biden. The timing of all this is, but had it happened 3 days before Super Tuesday, people would have said the timing of this is weird. There is no good time to have the guy who was the front runner for the majority of the campaign get one of these accusations. And it's not, let's be clear, there were, not these kind of accusations, but handsy accusations suggesting that Biden, didn't know where his desires ended and other people's, sort of bodily integrity started.
Which is actually an indication to me of his power, right? Men who have been senators since they were 30 have had a tremendous amount of power when the rules were a little bit different for decades. And if he's saying things like this about Tara Reade, I thought she was in, whatever, I thought she liked me too. And maybe he thinks, just as he thinks that touching senators, state senators, or aides, or U.S. senators' wives inappropriately is accepted. I think they're no matter what. I think people are going to come out and share their stories. I don't know if they're going to be as serious. I'm not serious is not the right word. As damning as Tara Reade's, right. But I have no doubt that there's going to be more stories. What I think is probably going to happen from the Democratic media establishment is they're going to try to block them from appearing on cable news, just so it doesn't distract away from Trump. I don't actually think it'll impact the vote that they want. That's my hard truth in this is we as progressives, we have a tremendous amount of power in the primary. And right now, especially with COVID and with Trump, we're not getting, I know a lot of people are frustrated. They're like, well, why aren't people taking this seriously? And I think a lot of it has to do with just this media landscape that we're in. It's not because these aren't serious allegations. It's just, we live in a world right now where Donald Trump.
And let's be honest too. I think there's a lot of people who are making the calculation.
Yeah.
I want Trump out. He's the best shot to get Trump out.
That's what I'm saying. He's screwing up a pandemic.
That's it.
And it's not worth it to a lot of folks.
And, we are the guests we spoke to today. I mean, we are stock markets, artificially inflated right now.
Right.
But the fact of the matter, this is not going away. So we'll see.